There are women in this world who don't send the first message, not because they don't care, not because they're playing a game, not because someone told them to wait, but because something inside them shifted, slowly, silently, without warning. And after that shift, they simply stopped needing to reach first. If you're here right now, there is a reason for that, not a coincidence, not the algorithm. Something in you recognized this before your mind caught up to it. Something that already knows what this is going to be about. And that something, that quiet internal compass, is exactly what we're going to talk about today. Because there is a specific type of woman who reaches a place in her life where she no longer needs people the way she used to. Where the need for constant reassurance fades. Where the urge to explain herself disappears. Where the desperation to be understood by everyone transforms into a quiet acceptance that only the right ones will ever truly see her. And that is more than enough. Most people look at this woman and say she's cold. They are wrong. They have always been wrong. And somewhere inside you, you already knew that too. There is a kind of woman that exists in this world, and she is not common. She doesn't perform her emotions. She doesn't fill every silence with noise. She doesn't hand her inner world to just anyone who asks for it. She watches, she listens, she observes before she speaks. She has been through something, not necessarily one dramatic event, but a series of smaller ones. Moments that stacked quietly on top of each other until the weight of them changed the shape of who she was. Moments where she gave everything and received almost nothing. Where she waited for reciprocity and learned what it feels like when it never comes. Where she trusted and discovered that her trust was not always placed in safe hands. She didn't become guarded overnight. It happened the way most real things happen. Gradually, then completely. And one morning, she woke up and realized that something fundamental had changed. That she was no longer willing to bleed for people who wouldn't even acknowledge the wound. That the part of her that used to beg to be chosen had grown quiet. That she had, without planning it, without announcing it, become someone who could stand completely still inside herself, even when everything around her was uncertain. That woman is rare, and if any part of you is recognizing yourself in her right now, keep watching, because this is about you. Pay close attention to this part, because what I'm about to say is something most people will never hear out loud. Emotional independence is not a personality type. It is not something you are born with. It is something that is built slowly, painfully, often without your consent, through experiences that teach you in the most visceral way possible that you cannot place the entirety of your emotional stability inside another person. Because people leave, people change, people disappoint you, not always out of cruelty, but out of their own limitations. Limitations they may not even be aware of. And when you have placed your entire sense of peace in someone who was never equipped to hold it safely, the collapse, when it comes, is total. You felt that collapse, maybe more than once. And each time, something in you rebuilt itself slightly differently than before. Slightly stronger, slightly quieter, slightly less willing to hand the same thing to someone who hadn't earned it. That is not damage. That is intelligence responding to experience. The woman who has learned emotional independence is not the woman who never got hurt. She is the woman who got hurt enough times to understand at a cellular level that she is the only one she can truly guarantee will still be there in the morning. And so she started building from the inside. While other women were still searching for someone to complete them, you were learning how to complete yourself. While others were pouring their energy into people who gave back half as much, you were quietly redirecting that energy inward. Not selfishly, not without love, but with a growing awareness that the most important relationship you will ever have is the one you have with your own mind, your own instincts, your own peace. While others needed constant company to feel okay, you were learning to sit with yourself. To stay in a room alone on a Friday night and not feel the panic that used to come with that. To eat at a table by yourself without the desperate need to be on your phone the entire time. to take a drive alone and feel the silence as something that holds you rather than something that suffocates you. This is not a small thing. In a world that is terrified of stillness, the woman who can sit inside silence without flinching is a woman who has accessed something most people will spend their entire lives looking for in the wrong places. You found it, not easily, not comfortably, but you found it. Here is what that woman actually looks like from the inside. And this is where it gets real. She moves through her days differently than most. When something bothers her, she doesn't immediately reach for her phone to process it out loud with someone else. She sits with it first. She lets it settle. She observes her own reaction before she decides what to do with it. This is not suppression. This is self-possession. There is a fundamental difference between burying a feeling and choosing when and how to address it. When someone disappoints her, she doesn't perform the disappointment. She doesn't send 3 messages asking for an explanation. She doesn't spiral into a place of self-doubt, wondering what she did wrong. She registers it. She adjusts her understanding of that person accordingly. And she moves with the new information, not cold, precise. When she sets a boundary, she doesn't negotiate it, not because she's rigid, but because she's been through the version of herself who negotiated every boundary she set, and she watched what happened. She watched how people took every inch of flexibility as an invitation to push further. She learned that a boundary explained and re-explained and apologized for is not a boundary at all. It's a suggestion. And she is done making suggestions about her own peace. When she pulls back from someone, and she does pull back because her instincts are sharp and she has learned to listen to them, she does it without drama, without a lengthy conversation, without the need to be understood. She simply creates space, and she stays in it, and she watches what happens on the other side of that space. And what happens, almost always, tells her everything she needed to know. Nobody talks about this part enough, so stay with me here. The woman who has built real emotional independence develops a kind of perception that feels almost uncomfortable at times. She starts to see things, patterns in people's behavior that others miss entirely. The gap between what someone says and what they actually do. The subtle ways that certain people try to make themselves indispensable. The performance of care that doesn't hold up when something is actually required. The manipulation that arrives dressed as love, as loyalty, as need. She sees it, not because she is cynical, not because she's looking for it, but because when you stop being emotionally dependent on other people's approval, your vision clears. The desperation to believe that someone is good, that a relationship is safe, that a situation will get better. That desperation used to cloud everything. It used to make you see what you needed to see instead of what was actually there. And now it's gone. Now you see clearly, and seeing clearly is both a gift and its own kind of grief, because seeing clearly means that you walk into rooms and feel the undercurrents that most people don't register. You watch someone speak and hear the subtext beneath the words. You recognize the people who are performing kindness for an audience. You notice who shows up and who only appears when something is convenient for them. You see the dynamics that others call overthinking and that you recognize quietly as simply awareness. This is one of the things that makes you different, and different in a world built for people who move in crowds comes with a price. Here is the part that is heavy, the part that is real. The part that lives in the quiet of 2 a.m. when the clarity that protects you during the day turns into something that just feels lonely. The emotional independence you built. The same independence that keeps you whole, that preserves your peace, that ensures you never collapse the way you collapsed before. It separates you, not in a dramatic way, not in a way that's always visible, but in a way that you feel consistently. In social situations, in conversations, in relationships that start with promise and eventually reveal their limits. You are in a room full of people and you feel the distance, not because you dislike them, not because you are above them, but because the conversation exists on a surface you've grown past, because the thing you actually want to talk about The real thing, the underneath thing, doesn't fit the format of the interaction. And you've been through enough attempts to force depth into spaces that were only built for surface, that now you just don't try. You sit, you smile, you contribute what the space allows, and you carry the rest home with you, alone. There are connections you've outgrown. People who feel safe in a nostalgic way, but who you have nothing left to genuinely share with. Not because anything went wrong, but because you grew in a direction they didn't. And the distance between those directions is now too honest to ignore. There are conversations you want to have that you cannot have with almost anyone in your current life. Not because people are bad, but because depth requires a certain willingness to go underneath the comfortable version of a story, and most people are not willing to do that. Most people want company, not truth, and you have gotten to the place where you are no longer willing to pretend the two are the same thing. The loneliness that comes with that is particular. It is not the loneliness of being alone. You have made peace with being alone. It is the loneliness of being in company and still being fundamentally unseen. Of talking to someone and knowing the entire time that the version of you they are speaking to is an edited version, a translated version, a version small enough to fit the space they're offering. That loneliness is its own kind of exhaustion. And if you have been carrying it quietly, without telling most people, because you already know most people won't understand, I want you to know that I see it. I see what it costs. But here is what that cost means. And this is the part that changes everything when you really let it land. The fact that you are lonely in that specific way, the way that comes from depth, from awareness, from having grown past certain versions of connection, that is not evidence that something is broken in you. It is evidence that you have arrived somewhere real. Most people never arrive here, not because they couldn't, but because the journey here requires a willingness to feel, to lose, to be disappointed, to sit inside the discomfort long enough to let it transform you instead of just surviving it. Most people escape before the transformation completes. They find someone to distract them. They settle for something familiar. They go back to the version of themselves that needed less, asked for less, expected less, because at least that version was comfortable. You didn't do that. You stayed in the fire long enough to let it change you, and now you are here, different, quieter, clearer, lonelier in the specific way that comes from depth rather than isolation. More selective in a way that some people will misread as arrogance, and that is actually simply self-respect. You have stopped being grateful for connection that costs you your peace. You have stopped mistaking emotional availability for emotional intelligence in other people. You have stopped giving your inner world to everyone who expresses interest in it. You have stopped trying to be understood by people who never intended to understand you in the first place. And in doing all of that, in releasing all of that, you have become something extraordinary, a woman who is complete within herself, not closed, not done growing, not without desire for real connection and real love and real intimacy with the rare people who earn it, but complete, stable at the core, rooted in herself in a way that no circumstance, no departure, no disappointment can fully uproot. That is not coldness. That is not a trauma response you need to fix. That is not a wall that needs to come down. That is the result of a woman doing the most difficult and most important work a human being can do. The work of building an inner life so solid, so honest, so genuinely hers that she no longer needs to borrow her peace from anyone else. The world will keep calling it cold. The world has always been uncomfortable with women who don't need its approval to feel worthy, but you know what it actually is. You know, somewhere in your chest, in that quiet place that has always known things before your mind had the language for them. You know that what you have built is not a limitation. It is a liberation. The silence you carry is not emptiness. It is fullness. It is full of every time you chose not to explain yourself to someone who had already decided who you were. Full of every boundary you finally honored. Full of every morning you woke up and chose your own peace before anyone else's comfort. Full of every moment you sat alone and realized, slowly, with a kind of wonder you hadn't expected, that you were okay. That you were more than okay. That you were, against all the odds of everything you had been through, genuinely, quietly, profoundly okay. You stopped needing people the way you used to. That is not the end of something. That is what becoming whole actually looks like. And you, the woman watching this, the one who recognized herself in the very first sentence, you are already there. You just needed someone to say it out loud.